The Winchester Model 12 earned a reputation in Vietnam that no other shotgun could match. Marines called it the perfect repeater. The few soldiers lucky enough to carry one refused to give them up. But here's what most people don't know. The Model 12 was already obsolete when Vietnam started. Winchester had stopped regular production in 1964. The guns that went to Vietnam were mostly World War II and Korean War veterans, some over 20 years old. Today, we're examining why this pre-World War II shotgun design became the most desired close-quarters weapon in Vietnam, despite being in critically short supply throughout the entire war. The scarcity defined everything about the Model 12 experience in Vietnam. Winchester introduced the Model 12 in 1912 as a premium pump-action shotgun. The design featured machined steel internals, tight tolerances, and hand-fitted parts that made each gun expensive to produce but exceptionally smooth to operate. By World War II, the Model 12 had become the U.S. military's standard combat shotgun. Approximately 80,000 military Model 12s were produced during that war, primarily in trench gun configuration with 20-inch barrels, heat shields, and bayonet lugs. After World War II, these military Model 12s went into storage. Some saw service in Korea. By the early 1960s, when Vietnam was escalating, the inventory of serviceable military Model 12s had shrunk dramatically through wear, loss, and deterioration. Winchester was no longer manufacturing the Model 12 to military specifications. The company had introduced the Model 1200 as a cheaper replacement. When the military needed shotguns for Vietnam, Winchester couldn't supply new Model 12s in quantity. The result was that Model 12s in Vietnam were almost all refurbished World War II-era guns. Supply records indicate approximately 3,800 Winchester Model 12 shotguns were deployed to Vietnam during the entire war, a tiny number compared to nearly 70,000 Stevens Model 77E shotguns. This scarcity created a prestige around the Model 12. Having one meant you'd gotten lucky in the supply lottery or had connections to acquire a scarce resource. The Marine Corps became the primary holder of available Model 12 inventory. Marines had a cultural attachment to the Winchester shotgun dating back to World War I trench warfare. The Devil Dogs legend included Marines using Winchester Model 1897 trench guns so effectively that Germans protested them as inhumane weapons. This tradition continued through World War II with the Model 12, through Korea, and into Vietnam. When Model 12s were available, Marines got first priority. The guns went to Fleet Marine Force units operating in I Corps, the northernmost region of South Vietnam. Marine infantry units assigned Model 12s to specific tactical roles rather than distributing them randomly. The allocation followed a consistent pattern across different companies and battalions. Point men received priority for Model 12 allocation when shotguns were available. Walking point in Vietnam meant being first into every potential ambush, first to encounter enemy forces, first to die if contact occurred. The Winchester provided this firepower. The smooth pump action allowed rapid fire. Experienced operators could empty all 5 rounds in under 3 seconds. At jungle engagement distances of 10 to 20 feet, each blast of double-aught buckshot contained 9.33 caliber lead pellets spreading across a pattern that would hit multiple targets or guarantee hits on a single target without precise aiming. Marine Lance Corporal Michael Jenkins, whose account appears in the Marine Corps Oral History Collection, described walking point with a Model 12. You had maybe 1 second between seeing Charlie and being dead. The Winchester gave you the best chance because you just pointed and everything in front of you got hit. Didn't need to aim, just point and fire. The psychological confidence the weapon provided mattered as much as the ballistics. Point men knew they carried the most deadly close-range weapon in the infantry. That knowledge helped counter the terror of walking first into ambushes. Tunnel operations represented another priority use. The Cu Chi district northwest of Saigon contained over 150 miles of Viet Cong tunnels. Marines conducting operations in this area frequently encountered tunnel complexes requiring exploration and clearance. Tunnel warfare occurred in absolute darkness at distances measured in feet. The combatant who fired first usually survived. The one who hesitated died. Marines descending into tunnels sometimes carried Model 12 shotguns, with the weapon's length making it awkward in confined spaces. The alternative, pistols or submachine guns, lacked the immediate stopping power that shotguns provided. One technique involved pointing the shotgun forward and firing at any sound or movement. The buckshot pattern would fill the tunnel width at typical engagement distances. Precise target identification wasn't possible in darkness anyway. Corporal James Patterson, interviewed for a Vietnam tunnel warfare study, explained the logic. In the tunnels, you couldn't see anything. You heard something, you fired at the sound. The Model 12 meant whatever was making that sound wasn't a threat anymore. A pistol you might miss. The Winchester didn't miss. Building and bunker clearing also utilized the Model 12's capabilities. Vietnam's villages and cities contained numerous structures requiring clearing during operations. The technique was brutal. Throw grenades through doors and windows, immediately follow with soldiers firing weapons as they entered. The Model 12 excelled at this. The shotgun could be fired one-handed if necessary, allowing the other hand to operate doors or signal teammates. The devastating close-range effect cleared rooms faster than rifle fire. Bunkers constructed by Viet Cong forces required direct assault when artillery or airstrikes weren't available. Marines approaching bunkers under fire used Model 12s to blast buckshot through firing ports, suppressing defenders long enough to close distance and eliminate the position with grenades or satchel charges. The mechanical excellence of the Model 12 separated it from every other Vietnam shotgun. The action was butter smooth compared to budget shotguns. The pump stroke required minimal effort. The machined steel parts fit together with precision that prevented binding or hesitation. This smoothness mattered enormously in combat. When your life depended on firing 5 rounds as fast as possible, any friction or resistance in the action cost precious time. The Model 12's action was so well designed that soldiers could operate it almost by reflex. The bottom ejection system, spent shells ejected downward instead of to the side, prevented ejected shells from hitting the shooter's face or interfering with the action. In rapid-fire situations, this detail prevented disruptions that side-ejecting shotguns experienced. The trigger disconnect was perfectly timed. The Model 12 couldn't be slam-fired like the older Model 1897, but the trigger reset was crisp and immediate. Shooters could fire, pump, and fire again in one fluid motion without conscious thought. Marines who'd fired both the Model 12 and the Stevens 77E described the difference as night and day. The Stevens worked, but required deliberate operation. The Winchester flowed. The durability under combat conditions impressed everyone who used these weapons. Remember that Vietnam Model 12s were often 20-plus years old. They'd been through World War II, sat in storage, been refurbished, and shipped to a new war. The fact that they functioned at all testified to the original manufacturing quality. But they didn't just function, they excelled. The tight tolerances that made the action smooth also meant parts wore evenly and maintained proper relationships even after thousands of rounds. The machined steel internals didn't bend, crack, or fail under stress that destroyed cheaper shotguns. Field reports documented Model 12s continuing to function after being dropped, submerged in water, caked with mud, and subjected to abuse that would render lesser weapons inoperable. The gun's reputation for reliability was earned through demonstrated performance in terrible conditions. Sergeant Robert Martinez described his Model 12 surviving 11 months of continuous operations. I dropped it in a river during a firefight, dragged it through mud, fired probably 500 rounds through it, never cleaned it properly because we didn't have time or materials. Things still worked perfectly when I rotated home. The ammunition capacity limitation was the Model 12's primary tactical weakness. 5 rounds total, 4 in the magazine tube, 1 in the chamber. In any engagement lasting more than a few seconds, the Winchester ran dry and required reloading. Reloading required inserting individual shells through the loading port one at a time. Under combat stress, with adrenaline making fine motor control difficult, reloading was slow and fumbling. Marines carrying Model 12s adapted by keeping extra shells in various locations for quick access. Elastic shell holders on the buttstock, shells in pockets, some Marines taped shells to their flak jackets. But no carrying method made reloading truly fast. The 5-round limitation meant Marines with Model 12s needed riflemen nearby to provide covering fire when the shotgun went dry. This limitation was acceptable for point duty where the initial contact would be resolved quickly one way or another. It was more problematic in sustained engagements where enemies kept coming. The effective range ceiling created tactical constraints. The Model 12 firing 00 buckshot was devastating out to approximately 40 yards. Beyond that distance, the pattern spread too wide and individual pellet energy dropped too low for reliable effect. In Vietnam's jungle, where visibility often didn't extend beyond 40 yards anyway, this limitation was less critical. But in rice paddies, along rivers, or in any open terrain, the shotgun became nearly useless while enemies with AK-47s could engage effectively at several hundred yards. Marines carrying Model 12s had to be conscious of terrain and engagement distances. In jungle, the shotgun was king. In open areas, it was a liability. Smart squad leaders positioned shotgun-armed Marines accordingly. In jungle, put them on point. In open terrain, give them a rifle and have someone else carry the Winchester. The psychological warfare aspect emerged unexpectedly. The sound of a pump shotgun being racked, the distinctive cha-chink of the action cycling, has intimidating qualities. In darkness or limited visibility, that sound announces that whoever is holding the weapon has immediate deadly force available. Marines discovered that in village searches or checkpoint operations, the sound of chambering around in the Model 12 got compliance faster than shouted commands. The sound was universally recognized as meaning serious business. One Marine described using the technique during village searches. You walk into a hooch in darkness, you rack that Winchester, and everybody in there knows exactly what you're holding. Didn't need to speak Vietnamese. They understood pump shotgun in any language. The comparison to other available shotguns highlighted why Marines fought to keep Model 12s. The Stevens Model 77E was available in large numbers, but Marines who'd used both vastly preferred the Winchester. The difference in action smoothness, build quality, and reliability was immediately apparent. The Ithaca Model 37 was arguably as good as the Winchester, different design philosophy but similar quality. However, Ithaca 37s were even scarcer than Model 12s. Getting either one was fortunate. The Remington Model 870 started appearing in limited numbers later in the war. It was a good modern shotgun, but lacked the Winchester's prestige and the decades of Marine Corps tradition. When supply situations forced exchanges of weapons, Marines with Model 12s resisted giving them up. Stories circulated of Marines hiding Winchester shotguns to prevent them being turned in for Stevens 77Es or other replacements. The modifications and customizations showed how much users valued these weapons. Officially, modifying military weapons was prohibited. In practice, Marines personalized Model 12s in various ways that enhanced functionality or reflected individual preferences. Some removed the ventilated barrel heat shield that came standard on military models. The shield added weight and bulk without providing much benefit in Vietnam's climate, where sustained fire wasn't common enough to heat barrels dangerously. Others added sling swivels if the particular gun lacked them. Being able to sling the shotgun freed both hands for other tasks while moving through the jungle. The finish on Vietnam Model 12s varied depending on age and refurbishment history. Some retained the original Parkerized military finish. Others had been refinished with various protective coatings. A few showed bare metal where finish had worn away from decades of use. Marines sometimes added personal markings. initials, kill counts, unit designations. These customizations were technically violations, but reflected the bond between warrior and weapon that developed through shared combat. The maintenance challenges increased with the weapon's age. 20-year-old shotguns required more intensive maintenance than new weapons. Springs weakened, wood stocks dried and cracked, metal parts showed wear. Marines in the field lacked proper cleaning supplies and replacement parts for these vintage shotguns. Improvisation became necessary. One common problem was magazine spring weakness. After decades, the springs that pushed shells from the magazine tube toward the chamber lost tension. This caused feeding failures where the next shell wouldn't fully chamber. The field expedient solution was stretching the spring to restore tension. Marines would disassemble the magazine tube, remove the spring, stretch it by hand to increase tension, and reassemble. This worked temporarily, but was a sign that the weapon needed parts that weren't available. Stock cracks were another frequent issue. The walnut stocks on World War II-era Model 12s were beautiful, but vulnerable to cracking from impact or extreme humidity changes. Repairs involved field-expedient methods like wrapping cracks with tape or wire, improvising splints from wood or metal, or in extreme cases, replacing stocks with parts scavenged from damaged weapons. The lack of proper gun oil in the field meant Marines used whatever lubricants were available. LSA, lubricant small arms, worked when available. When it wasn't, soldiers used motor oil, hydraulic fluid, or even cooking oil to keep actions functioning. These makeshift maintenance practices kept weapons running, but highlighted the absurdity of fighting a war with 20-year-old firearms that should have been in museums or collections rather than combat zones. The Marine Corps culture around the Model 12 elevated it beyond just another weapon. Marines are tradition-focused. The Winchester shotgun's role in Corps history going back to World War I created reverence that transcended the weapon's practical capabilities. New Marines arriving in Vietnam quickly learned which weapons were prized and which were merely tolerated. The Model 12 was in the prized category. Getting assigned one meant you'd been recognized as capable and trustworthy. Some units had informal traditions around Winchester shotguns. When a Marine rotating home left the unit, he'd pass his Model 12 to a newer Marine he judged worthy. This weapon transfer ceremony carried weight. You were being trusted with the unit's heritage. Senior NCOs sometimes claimed the best condition Model 12s for themselves or for Marines they designated as deserving. This created hierarchy and competition that might seem silly to outsiders, but mattered enormously to the young men whose lives depended on their weapons. The rarity compared to World War II use illustrated how scarce good equipment was in Vietnam. In World War II, Model 12s were available in large numbers. Entire platoons could be equipped with them for Pacific Island assaults, where close-quarters jungle fighting was expected. In Vietnam, getting even one Model 12 per platoon was fortunate. Most units never saw them at all. The weapons went to Marines in the heaviest combat zones facing the most close-quarters fighting. This scarcity meant that the Model 12 experience in Vietnam was limited to a small percentage of those who served. The majority of soldiers and Marines never touched one, let alone carried one in combat. Yet the weapon's reputation and mystique spread throughout the military. Everyone knew the Model 12 was the best shotgun. Most just never got the chance to carry one. The post-Vietnam fate of these shotguns varied. Unlike the Stevens 77E shotguns that mostly stayed in Vietnam, the Model 12s were considered valuable enough to bring home. Their scarcity and quality meant they weren't written off as disposable. Military Model 12s that returned to the United States went into armories where they continued serving for decades. Some remained in military inventory until the 1990s. 80-year-old shotguns still considered combat-ready. Others were eventually surplused through the civilian marksmanship program or other disposal channels. These Vietnam veteran Winchester shotguns entered the collector market where they command premium prices. A military Model 12 with documented Vietnam service history can sell for $3,000 to $8,000, depending on condition and provenance. The combination of Winchester quality, military pedigree, and Vietnam War history makes them extremely desirable to collectors. Some Marines managed to bring Model 12s home as personal weapons through various official and unofficial channels. These shotguns became treasured possessions, passed down through families as heirlooms representing combat service and survival. The lessons learned from Model 12 use in Vietnam influenced future military shotgun procurement. The positive lessons were clear. Quality matters. Smooth, reliable action is worth premium cost, and shotguns have legitimate tactical applications in military operations. The negative lesson was equally clear. Relying on 20-year-old weapons for a modern war was unsustainable. The military needed current production combat shotguns with parts support and long-term availability. This realization eventually led to adoption of the Mossberg 500 series and later the Benelli M4 as standard military shotguns. These weapons incorporated the reliability and quality that made the Model 12 successful while being modern designs with manufacturer support. The veteran perspectives decades after Vietnam remain overwhelmingly positive. Marines who carried the Model 12 in combat speak of the weapon with affection and respect that borders on reverence. It wasn't just a tool, it was a trusted companion that brought them home alive. The smoothness of the action, the reliability under terrible conditions, the devastating effectiveness at close range, these practical attributes created emotional bonds that lasted lifetimes. One veteran stated simply, "The Winchester Model 12 was the finest combat shotgun ever made. I carried one for 7 months in Vietnam. I'm alive because that gun never failed me. I'll defend that weapon until I die." This sentiment appears repeatedly in veteran accounts. The Model 12 earned loyalty through performance when lives depended on it. The historical significance extends beyond the relatively small number of shotguns deployed. The Model 12's Vietnam service represented the end of an era in military firearms. It was the last time the U.S. military relied heavily on pre-World War II weapon designs in combat. The guns symbolized the supply shortages and equipment inadequacies that plagued American forces in Vietnam. The fact that the military was sending 1940s vintage shotguns into a 1960s war illustrated how unprepared the services were for Vietnam's demands. Yet simultaneously, the Model 12's continued excellence after decades of service demonstrated that good design and quality manufacturing create lasting value. These shotguns worked in Vietnam not because of their age, but because they'd been made right originally. The Winchester Model 12 in Vietnam was a weapon out of time, too old to be there, too good to be replaced, and too scarce to equip everyone who needed it. For the Marines fortunate enough to carry one, it represented the pinnacle of combat shotgun development. For those who wanted one but never got the chance, it represented what might have been in a better supplied war. The legacy lives on in collector markets, in Marine Corps tradition, and in the memories of veterans who trusted their lives to a pre-World War II shotgun design that proved itself in another war a generation later. If you carried the Winchester Model 12 in Vietnam, share your experiences in the comments. What unit were you with? What missions did you use it on? What do you remember about that weapon? For everyone else, understanding that some of the best weapons in Vietnam were also the oldest teaches important lessons about quality, sustainability, and the realities of military logistics. Share this video to preserve the Winchester Model 12's place in Marine Corps and Vietnam War history. Subscribe for more Vietnam content examining the real weapons, experiences, and stories that defined that war. Thank you for watching. The Winchester Model 12 earned its legendary status through performance when it mattered most, in combat with lives on the line.